So in the earlier lecture I talked about Dirac matrices. So now today I am going to talk about the charge density, current density and the expectation value. So here I will try to derive the equation of continuity and then how charge density and expectation value, charge density and current density looks like. So as we know that in the Klein-Gordon equation that charge density is negative, this rho will be negative in the Klein-Gordon equation. So here I will see that how this problem of negative charge density can be taken care when we are using Dirac formulation. So for this, consider an equation. Consider equation and the equation is that iota h cross curly psi over curly t, and psi is a function of r and t, and it is equal to h psi rt. This is Schrodinger wave equation. So also we know that h is c alpha x px plus c alpha y py, as we have discussed in the earlier lecture. C alpha z pz, right? Plus beta m naught c square. So it can be written as c alpha dot p plus beta m naught c square. And as I know that this momentum is basically minus iota h cross del. If it is this, then if I use this result here, then I can write down this equation as using this equation will become that iota h cross curly psi y curly t is equal to c minus iota h cross alpha x curly psi over curly x plus, sorry, not plus, but it will become minus iota h cross alpha y curly psi over curly y minus iota h cross alpha z curly psi over curly z, and c is taken outside. So I have taken care of this, and then it is beta m naught c square and psi, and it must be equal to 0. Now let us take the Hermitian conjugate of this, or rather than taking Hermitian conjugate, let me try to modify this, bringing this towards this side. If I bring this towards this side, then this equation can be written as iota h cross curly psi by curly t plus c, and here it is alpha x curly psi over curly x plus alpha y curly psi over curly y plus alpha z curly psi over curly z, and now it will become minus beta m naught c square psi is equal to 0. This is the equation, and let me call this as equation number 1. Now let us take Hermitian conjugate to 1. So if we take Hermitian conjugate then it will become iota h cross curly psi by curly t plus c alpha x curly psi over curly x alpha y curly psi over curly y plus alpha z curly psi over curly z, right? And minus beta m naught c square psi and whole Hermitian conjugate, means whole dagger, it must be equal to 0. That's what I am getting. Now I will apply a result. It's a very simple result which I will apply, that if I have a b whole dagger, then it can be written as b dagger a dagger. If I apply this, then this equation will become so then this equation can be written as like this. So it is minus iota h cross curly psi dagger over curly t plus c, then it is curly psi over curly x and alpha x dagger plus curly psi dagger over curly y alpha y dagger plus curly psi dagger over curly z alpha z dagger, right? And c is just outside it, and minus it is psi dagger m naught c square beta dagger, right? That's what I am getting, and it must be equal to 0. But alpha k and beta are Hermitian, which implies that alpha k dagger is equal to alpha k and beta dagger is equal to beta. So if I use this here, then I am getting it is equal to minus iota h cross curly psi dagger over curly t plus c curly psi dagger over curly x and alpha x dagger plus curly psi dagger over curly y alpha y dagger plus I will use this result, so that means this should not be there, and it should not be there. Then it is alpha psi curly psi dagger curly z and alpha z minus it is psi dagger m naught c square beta, and it must be equal to 0. And let me recollect these two equations. So this is the equation number 1, and this is the, let me call this as equation number 2. So I will use these two equations and apply using these two operation. That operation is now applying operation. If I apply this operation, then I can write down this operation psi dagger 1 minus 2 psi. So if I use this, then I can write down an equation that iota h cross psi dagger curly psi over curly t plus psi dagger alpha x curly psi over curly x plus psi dagger alpha y curly psi over curly y plus psi dagger alpha z curly psi over curly z. That's what I'm getting here. Yeah, so it is minus psi dagger beta m naught c square psi, sorry, not psi, yeah. Then minus will become plus, so minus iota h cross, it is psi curly psi dagger over curly t. Okay, not this, what you have to write down. Yeah, it is curly psi by curly t into dagger and into psi, right? Then it is plus, and c should be there. Yeah, c should be there. I missed that. Okay, c. Then curly psi dagger over curly x alpha x psi plus curly psi dagger over curly y and alpha y psi plus curly psi dagger over curly z alpha z psi, right? And minus beta m naught c square psi and psi dagger, right? And here this negative minus iota h cross is sitting like this, and it is equal to 0. This minus will become plus, and this minus will become plus, right? And so these two signs will collectively become positive, and when this sign is multiplied with it here, it will become positive. So that means this term will cancel out with it when I open this bracket. So you have to keep in mind. And let us collect like terms. So if I collect like terms, then I can write down that this is equal to, it is iota h cross is sitting here and here, so it can be taken outside, and it is psi dagger curly psi over curly t. This term and these two terms are put together. It is curly psi dagger by curly t and psi, sorry, yeah, this is one term which I collected. Similarly, these are the other terms. This term along with this term, they can be put together, and c is also common with both, right? So it is c. So I will write down it as psi dagger alpha x curly psi by curly x plus curly psi dagger over curly x into alpha x psi. I put these two together. Similarly, these two terms can be put together, and then this term is put together with this. So plus c, it is psi dagger, sorry, it's psi dagger, it is alpha y curly psi over curly x plus curly psi dagger over curly x alpha, sorry, not x, what it is, y, it is y and alpha y and psi plus, now I can write down that c is psi dagger alpha z curly psi over curly z plus curly psi dagger over curly z alpha z psi, right? These two can be put together, and this is equal to 0. Here iota h cross is not equal to 0. That means rest of the term will be equal to 0, and if I try to look at this part, then this part can be written as like this. This part can be written as curly over curly t psi dagger psi, and similarly these terms, this term can be written as curly over curly x psi dagger alpha x psi, and similarly rest of the terms can be written, right? So if I do this little algebra, then I can write down that curly over curly t psi dagger psi plus c curly over curly x psi dagger alpha x psi plus curly over curly y psi dagger alpha y psi plus curly over curly z psi dagger alpha z psi. They can be they can put like this, and c is common to all, and this is equal to 0, and that means it can be written as curly over curly t and psi dagger psi plus curly over curly x c, it is psi dagger, sorry, psi dagger alpha x psi plus curly over curly y c psi dagger alpha y psi plus curly over curly z c psi dagger alpha z psi, and this is equal to 0. So if it is so, that means I should write down this as in the form of a divergence. So it is curly over curly t psi dagger psi plus divergence of c psi dagger alpha psi. It must be equal to 0, right? Now let me try to understand this product term, right? What does it mean? So here psi dagger psi, it can be written as like this, because it is psi 1 psi 2 star psi 3 star psi 4 star. It's a row matrix, now it's a column matrix, right? So it is psi 1 psi 2 psi 3 psi 4, and if I simplify it, then it can be written as psi 1 star psi 1 plus psi 2 star psi 2 psi 3 star psi 3 plus psi 4 star psi 4. Now it's a number. This is a plain number. This is like a number, and it's a positive. It's always definite positive. This number is definite positive, which we have to keep in mind. Also, if I compare this equation, let me compare this equation number 3. Let me call this as equation number 3. Comparing equation 3 with equation 4, then with equation of continuity in quantum mechanics. So it is curly rho by curly t plus divergence of j, it must be equal to 0. So if I compare this, then I can say that this rho is equal to psi dagger psi, and this is definite positive. It's a charge density, and it can be evaluated in this manner, right? And here this j is equivalent to, it is J is C psi dagger alpha psi. So it is basically the current density. Thus we have evaluated the charge density and current density, and the problem of negative energy, negative charge density has been sorted out using the this Dirac formulation, whereas this rho may be negative in the Klein-Gordon equation, right? So this is the advantage of this using. And similarly we can also evaluate the expectation value of any operator. Expectation value of any operator can be written as that expectation value, it is basically psi dagger A psi d cube x. So it is the expectation value of an operator, right? And where this A is a matrix or operator. Here this A can be written in the form of a matrix because psi dagger and psi, these are also matrices, right? So this is all about this. So here we have this lecture evaluated the expression for charge density and current density, and we have also talked about the equation of continuity. And then the idea of this has been further used to calculate the expectation value of any operator. So that's all for this lecture.